We feel the R&D department requires a more agile, digitally integrated leadership paradigm moving forward. Liam Vance said the word paradigm like he'd just discovered it in a fortune cookie and was immensely proud. His sister Chloe nodded, her expression a careful mask of solemn importance. It was the same look she'd worn at their father's funeral 6 months ago. They thought firing me would be the end of it, a simple line item in their Q3 restructuring budget. They were wrong. My name is Richard Novak. I'm 53 years old, and for the 28 years leading up to that moment, I was the senior research scientist at Meridian Coatings. I was, for all intents and purposes, the R&D department. The meeting took place in the main conference room, the one with the 20-foot mahogany table Arthur Vance, their father, and I had picked out together in 2008. Liam and Chloe, aged 31 and 29 respectively, sat at the head of it, where Arthur used to sit. They looked like a catalog ad for generational wealth. He wore a Brioni suit that probably cost more than my first car. She had a new Rolex on her wrist, the diamonds catching the recessed lighting. They had MBAs from Wharton, a fact they'd managed to drop into every company-wide meeting since they'd taken over. They also had a combined total of 0 days of experience in polymer chemistry. "Richard," Chloe began, her voice smooth as polished glass, "you've been a foundational part of this company's history. Dad always spoke so highly of you." She paused, letting the empty platitude hang in the air. "But the market is changing. We need to pivot towards a more dynamic, cost-effective operational model. As part of that optimization, we're eliminating the senior research scientist position." Eliminating the position, not firing me. A neat little piece of HR jargon designed to avoid a wrongful termination suit. It was a clean, bloodless execution. I felt a cold stillness settle in my chest. I'd known this was coming. I knew for sure 3 weeks ago when I overheard them in the hallway talking about legacy overhead and laughing about my 1998 Toyota Camry. Liam slid a thin folder across the table. "We've put together a severance package. 3 months' salary. We feel it's very generous. 3 months. For 28 years of my life. For building the company from a 2-man operation in a rented garage into a $200 million industry leader. For the nights I slept on a cot in the lab perfecting the formula. For the missed school plays and anniversaries. My knuckles were white where they gripped the arms of my chair. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings," Liam added, already looking at his iPad, my dismissal already a completed task on his to-do list. "We wish you the best in your future endeavors." He didn't look up. I stood, my legs steady. I didn't open the folder. I just looked at them. These 2 children playing dress-up in their father's office. They saw a 53-year-old man in a slightly worn blazer, an expensive but obsolete piece of company infrastructure. They didn't see the man who held the company's life in his hands. They had no idea that this scene would not be remembered as their first decisive act of leadership. It would be remembered as their fatal, career-ending mistake. Because what their expensive degrees and arrogant certainty failed to account for was a single, overlooked piece of paper filed on May 17, 2002. They had just fired the man who personally owned the patent for the only thing they had of any value. If you enjoy stories about overconfident heirs learning a hard lesson in humility and the true nature of value, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because you're going to want to see exactly how this plays out. I promise stories like this one, tales of corporate karma and quiet justice, are what this channel is all about. I started with Arthur Vance in 1996. I was 25, fresh out of my master's program, and he was 35, a charismatic salesman who could sell ice in a blizzard. We met at a trade show. I had a theory about a cross-linking polymer formula. He had a vision. We shook hands, and Meridian Coatings was born in his garage in Austin, Texas. For the first 5 years, it was just us and a mountain of debt. He handled the clients. I handled the chemistry. My life was a cycle of beakers, burners, and volumetric flasks. I worked 80-hour weeks, fueled by cheap coffee and the thrilling pursuit of a breakthrough. My wife left me in 1999. She said I was married to the lab. She wasn't wrong. I missed my sister's wedding. I missed my own 30th birthday. But in early 2001, I finally cracked it. I called it DuraShield. It was a ceramic polymer hybrid coating that was damn near miraculous. It was virtually impervious to corrosion, abrasion, and extreme temperatures. It bonded at a molecular level, creating a shell that was harder than steel, but flexible. Arthur, ever the showman, would demonstrate it to potential clients by coating a piece of sheet metal, then taking a blowtorch and a ball-peen hammer to it. We got our first major contract 3 weeks later. By 2005, we were out of the garage and in a proper facility. By 2010, we were the undisputed leader in specialized protective coatings for the aerospace, marine, and energy sectors. Every time a client specified a need for extreme environmental protection, our name came up. Our profit margins were absurd because nobody could replicate what DuraShield did. It wasn't just a product. It was a moat around our business, and I was the one who had dug it. Liam and Chloe were just kids then. I remember them visiting the office, running around while Arthur tried to get them interested in the family business. They never were. They were more interested in their trust funds and their summer trips to Europe. Arthur was a great salesman and a loyal friend, but he was a soft father. He gave them everything, hoping to earn their affection. They grew up believing that success was something you inherit, not something you build in a freezing garage at 3 a.m. When Arthur got sick, the decline was fast. Pancreatic cancer, 6 months from diagnosis to the end. His final weeks were a blur of hospital visits and hushed conversations. He made me promise I would look after the company. "It's my legacy, Richard," he'd whispered, his voice thin as paper. "It's our legacy. I promised I would. I just didn't realize I'd have to protect it from his own children." The breaking point came in February 2020. No, that's not right. The breaking point was much earlier. The real trouble started back in 2002. The dot-com bubble had burst, and investment capital had dried up. We were on the verge of bankruptcy. We had the formula for DuraShield, but we were burning through cash with no new contracts on the horizon. It was a terrifying time. One night, Arthur and I were at a dive bar near the old lab, drowning our sorrows. With us was Marcus Thorne, Arthur's lawyer. Marcus was an old-school attorney, sharp and cautious, who wore a bow tie and suspenders. He was worried. "Arthur, the company's financial position is precarious," Marcus said, stirring his whiskey with his finger. "If we go under, the creditors will seize all company assets. That includes intellectual property." He turned to me. "Richard, this formula, it's your creation. It came from your mind, your work." I just nodded, exhausted. "We need to file the patent for DuraShield immediately," Marcus continued. "But I don't want to file it under Meridian's name. Not right now. If the company folds, the patent gets sold for pennies on the dollar to our competitors." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "File it under your name. Richard Novak. You are the inventor. You can hold it personally. When the company is back on its feet, we can draft a formal assignment agreement to transfer ownership to Meridian. It's a simple document. But for now, this protects your life's work. It protects our future." Arthur, ever the optimist but shaken by our near collapse, agreed instantly. "He's right, Rich. It's your formula. Protect it." So I did. On May 17th, 2002, with Marcus's help, I filed the application. United States patent for 7,811,642 was granted 18 months later. The inventor was listed as Richard Novak. The assignee was listed as Richard Novak. Of course, things got better. 6 months later, we landed a massive defense contract. The money started pouring in. We grew so fast, so chaotically, that the formal assignment was forgotten. It became one of those things we'd get around to. Arthur and I worked on a handshake and mutual trust. The idea that I would ever withhold the formula, or that he would ever push me out, was unthinkable. The piece of paper in my safe deposit box became a historical artifact, a reminder of how close we came to losing everything. Until the day his children decided it was the only thing that mattered. The escort from security was the most humiliating walk of my life. Two young guards, guys I'd normally share a joke with by the coffee machine, walked on either side of me, their faces grimly professional. We walked past the labs, past the chemists and technicians I had personally hired and trained. Nobody made eye contact. They just stared at their screens, suddenly fascinated by routine data analysis. Their silence was a physical weight. In my office, one of the guards stood by the door while the other watched me pack. It was surreal. I took my photos, one of my daughter, Emily, at her high school graduation, one of Arthur and me grinning like idiots in front of our first real piece of machinery. I took the worn-out copy of the CRC Handbook of Chemistry and Physics that had been my Bible since grad school. I left everything else, the company mugs, the service awards, the framed articles about our success. They weren't mine anymore. As I was boxing up the last of my things, Liam appeared in the doorway, blocking the exit. He held a tablet. One last thing, Richard. Company policy requires a final sign-off on the exit paperwork. It includes a non-disclosure and a non-compete clause. He was trying to lock me down, to make sure I couldn't take my knowledge to a competitor. The irony was thick enough to choke on. I looked at him, then at the tablet. My voice was low and steady. I'm not signing anything. Liam's jaw tightened. It's standard procedure. Your severance offer is insulting, and I do not accept the terms of my termination, I said calmly. Therefore, I am under no obligation to sign your documents. Send them to my lawyer. I didn't have a lawyer yet, but he didn't need to know that. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. This wasn't going according to his neat, orderly script. He was used to people rolling over. I picked up my small box of personal effects. "Excuse me," I said, walking directly toward him. For a second, I thought he might stand his ground. A petty display of power. But he hesitated, then took an involuntary step back, letting me pass. It was a small victory, but it was something. As I walked down the hall and out of the building I had helped build, I didn't look back. The cold stillness inside me was hardening into something else, something solid and sharp. It was resolve. The first call I made was to the law firm of Thorne, Henderson, and Beck. Marcus Thorne had passed away a few years after Arthur, but his name was still on the door. I was put through to a partner named Anya Sharma. She was in her late 30s, with a voice that was all business. I explained my situation. I told her I had been terminated, and that I was the sole, unassigned patent holder for the company's core technology. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought she was going to tell me I was mistaken. Then I heard the faint sound of rapid typing. "Patent number 7,811,642, she asked, her voice suddenly electric. "That's the one," I said. "Mr. Novak," she said slowly, the professional calm in her voice, now barely concealing a predatory excitement. "I'm clearing my calendar. Can you be at my office with the original patent certificate in 1 hour?" Anya Sharma was a force of nature. She was razor sharp, aggressive, and had a deep, abiding love for intellectual property law. When I laid the original, heavy paper certificate on her conference room table, she looked at it like it was the Holy Grail. "They didn't do a patent assignment audit when they took over?" she asked, incredulous. "No due diligence? Their lawyers didn't check the chain of title on their most critical IP asset?" "They have MBAs," I said. "They're big picture guys. Details are for the little people." Anya laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Oh, this is beautiful. This is litigation malpractice on their counsel's part and executive malpractice on theirs. They've been infringing on your patent since the day they fired you. She leaned back in her chair. So, what's the goal here, Richard? Do you want to burn the company to the ground, or do you want to own it? That question clarified everything. I thought of Arthur, his dying wish for me to protect his legacy. Burning it down would be a betrayal of that promise, but letting his children run it into the ground was also a betrayal. I want to save it, I said. From them. Good, she smiled. That's much more profitable and much more satisfying. Our strategy was simple. We would wait. Anya explained that every single product they manufactured and sold containing DuraShield was an act of infringement. Every day that passed, the damages grew. While they were celebrating their cost-cutting genius, they were unknowingly racking up a catastrophic liability. I spent the next 2 months working with Anya and her team. It felt like my old days in the lab, but instead of chemicals, we were mixing legal precedents and financial data. I provided a complete list of every product that used the DuraShield formula. We pulled their public financial statements, their sales catalogs, and their marketing materials. We estimated the total revenue generated by infringing products was running at about $16.8 million a month. Meanwhile, Liam and Chloe were on a roll. They issued a glowing press release titled Meridian Coatings Enters New Era of Agile Innovation, which lauded their strategic restructuring. They hired a 26-year-old chemist from a competitor to be the new Director of Product Synergy. I knew the kid's work. He was competent, but he was no innovator. He was a manager. He couldn't create another DuraShield in 1,000 years. They also started spending. They leased a new Gulfstream G650. They gutted the executive wing for a multi-million-dollar renovation, complete with a cold brew coffee bar and a Peloton room. I watched it all from a distance, through trade, publications, and the company's own boastful social media posts. Every picture of them smiling in their new office, every post hashtagged "Honor Leadership and Disruption" was another nail in their own coffin. They were celebrating on the deck of a ship that was taking on water, completely oblivious to the hole they had drilled in the hull. The bait came 6 weeks after my termination. It was bigger than we could have hoped for. Meridian Coatings announced it had secured the largest contract in its history, a 10-year, $500 million exclusive deal with AeroCorp, a defense and aerospace giant, to supply coatings for their next-generation satellite and drone fleet. The entire contract was predicated on the unique performance characteristics of DuraShield. Liam and Chloe held a press conference. They stood at a podium, beaming, talking about shareholder value and a new chapter of growth. This landmark partnership is a testament to Meridian's forward-thinking vision, Liam declared. Anya and I watched the live stream in her office. That's it, she said, her eyes gleaming. That's the jugular. The next morning, at 9 a.m. sharp, 2 sets of papers were served by federal marshals. The first was a cease and desist letter and a lawsuit for patent infringement, delivered to Meridian's headquarters. It named the company and Liam and Chloe Vance personally as defendants. The damages sought were calculated at 3 times the gross revenue of all infringing products, plus punitive damages for willful infringement. The number was north of $100 million and climbing. The second set of papers was an injunction notice delivered to the General Counsel of AeroCorp. It informed them that their new supplier's core product was based on stolen intellectual property, and that any use of it would make AeroCorp itself liable for infringement. The $500 million deal was now radioactive. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. AeroCorp's legal team, smelling a disaster, immediately froze the contract and demanded an emergency meeting with Meridian's board. The company's stock, which was privately held but tracked by industry analysts, was instantly downgraded. The trade press, which had been praising Liam and Chloe a day earlier, was now running headlines like Meridian's miracle coating at center of massive IP lawsuit. An emergency board meeting was called for 48 hours later. The board consisted of 4 independent directors, old friends of Arthur's who had been lulled into complacency by years of steady profits. Now, they were wide awake and furious. Their passive oversight was about to cost them millions. Anya received a call from the board chairman, a grizzled old oilman named Frank Patterson. His voice was gravelly. "Ms. Sharma, your client has our full attention. The board is meeting on Friday at 2 p.m. We would like you and Mr. Novak to be there." When Anya and I walked into the conference room, the atmosphere was arctic. Liam and Chloe were at the far end of the table, flanked by a team of expensive lawyers from a top-tier firm. The Vances looked like they hadn't slept. Their designer clothes were rumpled, their faces pale and drawn. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a brittle, high-strung terror. The 4 board members sat stone-faced, their arms crossed. Liam's lead lawyer, a man with silver hair and a condescending smirk, started things off. "Let's be clear," he began. "This is a baseless shakedown by a disgruntled former employee. We have every confidence the courts will see it as such. Meridian's ownership of its core technology is not in question." Anya let him finish. She didn't say a word. She simply walked to the head of the table and plugged her MacBook into the room's projector. The first slide lit up the 80-inch screen behind her. It was a high-resolution scan of the patent certificate. United States Patent, No. 7, 811,642, granted November 18, 2003. Inventor, Richard A. Novak. Assignee, Richard A. Novak. Anya let the image sink in. The room was utterly silent. The whir of the HVAC system sounded like a jet engine. "As you can see," Anya said, her voice calm and clear, "the patent for the DuraShield formula was filed by and assigned to my client, Mr. Richard Novak, in 2002. It has never been reassigned." She clicked to the next slide. It was a single sentence in a large, bold font. "Can Meridian Coatings produce a signed patent assignment agreement for patent Treasure 7, Kin Inon 11, 6 and 42? All eyes turned to Liam, Chloe, and their legal team. Their lead lawyer began shuffling papers, whispering frantically to his junior associates. They had been searching for that document for the last 48 hours. They knew it didn't exist. Liam finally cracked. "This is a clerical error, a technicality. Dad meant for the patent to belong to the company," he stammered, his voice rising in panic. Frank Patterson, the board chairman, slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "A technicality? Son, you and your sister bet this entire company and a $500 million contract on a technicality you didn't even bother to check. Did you perform any due diligence at all when you took over?" Chloe finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Dad handled all that. We trusted—" "You trusted," Frank cut her off, his voice dripping with contempt. "You inherited a kingdom and couldn't be bothered to check if you actually owned the crown jewels." The power in the room had shifted. It was a physical thing, flowing away from the head of the table and consolidating around Anya and me. The Vance's lawyers were silent. They knew they were witnessing a legal and financial catastrophe of their own making. Then, for the first time since I'd walked in, I spoke. I looked directly at Liam and Chloe, the 2 people who had dismissed my life's work as a line item. "The formula is mine," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried across the room. "For 28 years, I allowed this company to use it. That permission was based on a relationship of trust and respect with your father. That relationship was terminated by you, 2 months ago, effective immediately." I paused, letting the words land. "My permission is therefore revoked, also effective immediately." The finality in my voice hung in the air. The Vances stared at me, their faces a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. They had fired an employee. They had created an enemy who owned their entire company, and they hadn't even known it. Anya took the floor again. "My client does not wish to destroy the company his friend built. she announced. He is here to save it. To that end, he is prepared to offer a solution. It is not a negotiation. These are his terms. She clicked to the final slide. Term sheet 1. Immediate transfer of 51% of Meridian Coating's total equity to a trust controlled by Richard Novak. He becomes the majority shareholder and chairman of the board. 2. Immediate and permanent removal of Liam Vance and Chloe Vance from all executive positions and the board of directors. 3. Execution of a binding, perpetual licensing agreement for patent number 7, 811,642, with a one-time back payment of $42 million for past infringement and a 15% royalty on gross revenues of all infringing products moving forward. 4. The board will vote on these terms now. A no vote will result in our filing an immediate injunction to halt all production and sales, and we will proceed with the lawsuit, seeking over $100 million in damages, which will bankrupt the company. The room held its breath. Frank Patterson looked at the slide, then at me, then at the terrified faces of Liam and Chloe. A slow smile spread across his face. All in favor of accepting Mr. Novak's generous offer? He asked the other board members. 4 hands went up instantly. The motion carries, Frank declared, banging an imaginary gavel on the table. He turned to Liam and Chloe. You're fired. Security will escort you out. The poetic justice was so perfect it was almost painful. The same 2 guards who had walked me out 2 months prior now stood at the door, waiting for them. Liam was sputtering, his face crimson. This is insane. I'm a Vance. This is my company. Not anymore, son, Frank said grimly. The aftermath was swift and total. Liam and Chloe were gone. Their half-finished office renovation was scrapped. The lease on the Gulfstream was terminated. They were left with a 49% stake that was now massively diluted in value by the royalty payments to my trust. They were rich on paper, but cash poor, and more importantly, powerless. The business press devoured the story. They were portrayed as the foolish, arrogant heirs they were. Their reputations were ruined overnight. I heard Liam ended up managing a BMW dealership in Dallas. Chloe attempted to rebrand herself as a social media business guru, but her feed was mostly just a sad collection of inspirational quotes and pictures of her expensive handbags. My first act as chairman was to call a company-wide meeting. I stood at the podium where Liam and Chloe had announced their disastrous contract. I announced that Meridian was returning to its founding principles: innovation, quality, and respect for the people who do the work. I rehired 3 of the other senior technicians the Vances had let go. I gave the entire R&D department an immediate 10% raise. Anya renegotiated the AeroCorp contract. With the ownership issue resolved, they were happy to proceed. The company was stable. The legacy was secure. With the first royalty payment of $2.52 million, I paid off the remainder of my mortgage. I wrote a check for my daughter Emily's next 3 years of tuition at Stanford. Then I went to a classic car auction and bought a fully restored 1968 Ford Mustang, cherry red, just like the one Arthur and I used to talk about building. A few months later, I was walking through the lab. It was late, but the lights were on. A young chemist I'd recently promoted to lab manager was standing before a whiteboard covered in complex equations, a look of intense concentration on her face. She saw me and smiled. "Mr. Novak," she said, "I think I have an idea for a variation on the DuraShield matrix. Something for low temperature flexibility." I looked at the board, at the elegant dance of molecules she had sketched out. The spark was there, the same spark I'd felt 30 years ago in a cold garage. I wasn't just an employee they had discarded. I was the foundation. I was the institutional memory. Value isn't determined by a title on a business card or a degree on a wall. It's built in quiet labs and late nights, with expertise and dedication. It's the one asset you can't inherit. You have to earn it. And if you don't respect it, you will, eventually, lose everything.